At 3:42 a.m., when Tangshan was a city of dark windows and cooling furnaces, the floor rolled like a wave under a sleeping million. A split second later, the wave turned to fists. Concrete cracked, brick burst. Bedroom walls leapt sideways and fell with a sound like a quarry letting go. People woke into dust and weight, and a darkness like a cave, the grid failing in the first heartbeat. Some felt the bed buck like a startled animal. Others felt nothing, just sudden falling, plaster in the mouth, and a roof across the chest. In the factories, night shift workers stumbled for doorways that no longer existed. Rails warped. The earth did not heave once. It punched and punched again. July 28, 1976. Northern China's biggest coal and steel city lay almost directly atop the fault that moved. The earthquake would be written as magnitude 7.5 by some, 7.6 or 7.8 by others, but the number barely captured what it did. The rupture ran under neighborhoods, under dormitories and bathhouses and machine sheds, and dropped them in less than 20 seconds. Whole apartment blocks collapsed in identical piles, stairwells folded like paper fans. Water tanks split and spilled, soaking the ruins and then disappearing into broken mains. Families clawed to find each other with the tools they had: hands, boards, a cooking pot as a shovel. Rescues happened by touch and voice. Knock if you can hear me. Blink once for yes. Out on the rail lines, locomotives skidded to a stop where the track had kinked into S-curves. Bridges dropped or leaned crazy over the canals. Roads looked like someone had lifted them, misaligned them, and set them down wrong. The city's hospitals were as broken as the neighborhoods around them, wards tilted, ceilings gone. Doctors set bones in courtyards and used benches as operating tables. People brought the injured to any patch of open ground that wasn't littered with glass and wires. Morning, when it came, arrived gray with dust. The sun rose on a city that did not look like a city. Beijing shook and woke. Tianjin shook and woke. In the first hours there was no official news, only the testimony of drivers who fought broken highways and soldiers who ran the last unbroken rails. Inside Tangshan, survivors organized before anyone reached them. Factory brigades became rescuers. Neighbors named the trapped and mapped the piles where each family slept. Water was life, wells were cracked, so people lined up at pumps that still gave a trickle. They tore sheets into slings and used iron bars as pries. Every collapse carried a second threat: fire from snapped fuel lines and the heat of high summer. People worked wet and barehanded. Gloves were somewhere under the bricks. At 6:45 that evening, the aftershock came, magnitude 7.1 by later measure, and whatever balance the city had found vanished. Walls that had leaned all day let go. Rescue pits became traps. People who had dragged themselves into the light were knocked down again in a storm of grit. Across the plain, villages that survived the morning lost their roofs and slept in fields. In Tangshan, the second darkness brought a different kind of quiet. Fewer voices, more sirens, the drone of trucks that had finally found a way in. The numbers would never be simple. The state would announce an official death toll in the hundreds of thousands. Outside estimates ran higher still. The living counted by absence. Streets had fewer morning vendors, fewer children running to fetch water, fewer names answered at muster. The industrial heart was wrecked, coke ovens tumbled, furnaces fractured, gantry cranes on their sides, and with them went jobs and the sense that tomorrow would look like yesterday. Where buildings stood, they were dangerous. Where they didn't, they were dangerous too. Open holes that kept shifting as people climbed. The People's Liberation Army moved in by the tens of thousands with shovels, stretchers, and field kitchens. Medical teams pitched canvas and ran triage on the grass. Engineers threw bridges over snapped canals and cut new lanes through the ruins for ambulances. Soldiers and students built tent cities along the margins of the devastation, hammered latrines, dug drainage in the hardpan so summer storms wouldn't turn everything into a soup of sewage. A city's systems are invisible until the day they aren't. Tangshan learned in a week what those systems were: potable water, waste out, light at night, a way to carry the hurt from where they fell to where someone could help them. Every hour without them was another layer of harm. Rumors filled the spaces where news could not reach. People said animals had cried out the day before. People said wells had bubbled. The year before, in Haicheng, a major quake had been predicted and lives saved. Here, there had been no warning. Even as bulldozers cleared streets, committees asked why, how, what equipment had failed, what expertise had been ignored. Later, China would build out a modern earthquake administration and strengthen codes so that brick boxes would not be allowed to masquerade as safe buildings. The reforms grew from grief and a city that refused to stay broken. In the weeks after the disaster, families set up small shrines beside foundations, a photograph propped against a brick, an enamel cup, a child's school badge. Columns of smoke hung over the plain. The work had a rhythm: dig, carry, rest, listen, and a psychology. Hope was heavy, but it kept people moving. Sometimes teams found a voice under a staircase void, a hand knocking against a pipe, a mattress arched like a tent over a sleeping body. Each rescue rippled through the neighborhood and brought a few minutes of relief to people who could no longer cry. The rebuild began before the aftershocks ended. Planners sketched a new Tangshan with wider roads and seismic gaps, with steel and rebar laid like arguments against the ground. Temporary housing rose in rows: white tents, then prefab boxes, then brick again with lintels that could hold. Factories were triaged like patients, which could be saved, which needed amputation, which would be rebuilt. The Great Northern Rail Link was stitched back together, first for aid, then for freight. Every repaired line felt like a promise hammered into place with spikes. The quake did not happen in a quiet year. China was already tilting toward a transition that would be marked, a few weeks later, by the death of Mao Zedong. People were grieving private losses inside a nation, reckoning with public change. Official memorials spoke of heroism, unity, rebirth, and some of that was true. So was the private language of those who stood over a patch of leveled brick and talked to the family that was no longer there. Cities can be rebuilt. The people inside them are not replaceable. Stand in Tangshan today, and the story has two layers. One is visible: a rebuilt city with boulevards, schools, steelworks humming, parks where the tents once stood. The other is in the way older residents listen for a truck before they step into the street, the way they keep a bag near the door, the way a distant rumble can freeze a conversation. They remember the July night when the ground stopped feeling like earth. They remember how long 20 seconds can be. Road to Ruins is about structures that fail and the systems that hold or break with them. Tangshan taught both lessons at once: that an industrial city can be smashed flat between one breath and the next, and that people can, through uncountable small acts, raise it back up. In the archives, seismograms from distant stations still record that minute as a ragged, rising line. On the ground, it was not a line, but a memory that split lives in two, before the wave and after. Thank you for listening to Road to Ruins. Subscribe for more true stories where systems fail and people pay the price.